You can gently drift to sleep to this calm and soothing narration of the Niccolo Machiavelli's entire philosophy, and you can subscribe to for more such videos and comment below from which part of the planet you're tuned in. With this, let's begin. Machiavelli's stark assessment of human nature forms the bedrock upon which his entire political philosophy is constructed. He did not believe in an inherent goodness that, if left unfettered, would naturally lead to harmonious societal structures. On the contrary, he posited that men, when given the opportunity, are prone to malice, driven by self-interest, fear, and avarice. One can say this in general about men, he writes, that they are ungrateful, fickle, simulators, and deceivers, avoiders of danger, eager for gain. This is not a moral judgment, but a pragmatic observation derived from centuries of historical analysis and his own direct experience in the cutthroat political arena of Renaissance Italy. This pessimistic outlook is not, however, an advocacy for tyranny as an end in itself, but rather a warning to the ruler. If you assume men are good, you will inevitably be ruined by those who are not. Therefore, a prince must operate from the understanding that he is surrounded by individuals who may, at any moment, act against his interests or the interests of the state, motivated by their own personal ambitions or fears. This recognition necessitates a different kind of leadership, one that prioritizes efficacy over abstract morality. The traditional virtues lauded by classical and Christian thought, generosity, mercy, piety, are not inherently dismissed by Machiavelli, but their application is recontextualized within the harsh realities of political life. A prince who is always generous will exhaust his resources and be despised. One who is always merciful will allow disorder to fester, inviting greater cruelty. The wise prince, therefore, learns when to employ these virtues and, crucially, when to depart from them. This leads to one of Machiavelli's most controversial yet pivotal concepts, virtue. Far from the modern understanding of moral virtue, Machiavellian virtue is a blend of strength, courage, skill, foresight, and determination. It is the ability of a leader to adapt to circumstances, to act decisively, to understand the currents of the world, and to impose his will upon events. A prince possessing virtue is not necessarily a good man in the conventional sense, but an effective one, capable of seizing opportunities and neutralizing threats. He must be a master of dissimulation, knowing how to appear virtuous even when acting otherwise, for the perception of virtue is often as powerful as its reality. This chameleon-like adaptability is essential because the political world is not static. It is constantly in flux, shaped by the relentless and unpredictable force of Fortuna. Fortuna, often personified as a capricious goddess, represents the external, uncontrollable circumstances, the sheer luck or misfortune that befalls human endeavors. Machiavelli famously compares Fortuna to a raging river that, when in flood, devastates everything in its path. However, he also asserts that while Fortuna governs half of our actions, the other half is left to our own control, to our virtue. The truly great prince, therefore, does not merely succumb to Fortuna, but, like an engineer, builds dikes and embankments in times of calm to mitigate the damage when the river inevitably overflows. He must be audacious, for Fortuna, Machiavelli suggests, is a woman who prefers to be beaten and commanded by the young and impetuous, rather than the cautious. This interplay between virtue and Fortuna is central to his entire thesis. A ruler must possess the mental agility and physical prowess, the virtue to navigate the unpredictable tides of fate, Fortuna, recognizing that there are moments when bold, even ruthless action is required to maintain the stability and security of the state. He argues that it is better to be impetuous than overly cautious, as fortune favors the brave. This doesn't mean recklessness, but a calculated willingness to take decisive action when the moment demands it, even if those actions might seem morally dubious by conventional standards. The prince must be both a lion and a lion to frighten the wolves and a fox to recognize the snares. This dual nature is not about being duplicitous for personal gain, but about employing all necessary means, fair or foul, to protect the state, which for Machiavelli is the highest good. The security and preservation of the political order trump individual ethical considerations, a radical departure from the moralizing political treatises of his predecessors. He compels the ruler to face the world as it is, stripped of illusions, and to act accordingly, prioritizing the survival of the state above all else. The concept of the reason of state, though not explicitly coined by Machiavelli, is the underlying principle that permeates his political thought, particularly in The Prince. It asserts that the security, stability, and well-being of the political community, be it a principality or a republic, are the ultimate justifications for political action. This profound idea necessitates that rulers, when faced with choices impacting the state's survival, may be compelled to act in ways that would be considered immoral or unethical in private life. For Machiavelli, the ends, the preservation and flourishing of the state, can justify means that might otherwise be condemned. This is not an endorsement of indiscriminate cruelty or wanton deception, but a sober recognition that exceptional circumstances demand exceptional measures. A prince, for instance, might find it necessary to be cruel, but only when that cruelty is swiftly applied and serves the purpose of maintaining order and preventing greater chaos. He famously advises that it is much safer to be feared than loved if one has to choose between the two. This counsel stems from his cynical view of human nature. Love is fickle and breaks under pressure, whereas fear, particularly the fear of punishment, creates a more reliable bond of obedience. However, he immediately qualifies this by stating that a prince must ensure he is not hated, for hatred, unlike fear, can incite rebellion and undermine the very foundation of his rule. Thus, the ideal is to be both loved and feared, but if a choice must be made, fear is the more robust foundation for authority. The reason for avoiding hatred is also pragmatic. While subjects might tolerate harshness for the sake of order, they will not tolerate arbitrary cruelty or the confiscation of property and women. These are the lines a prince must never cross, for they breed deep-seated resentment that no amount of fear can counteract. Machiavelli distinguishes between effective cruelty and ineffective cruelty. Effective cruelty is well used, applied quickly and decisively to eliminate threats and establish order, then ceased. Ineffective cruelty is ill-used, prolonged, and arbitrary, leading to resentment and instability. The ruler must master the art of knowing when to be feared, when to be generous, and when to be parsimonious, always with the state's welfare as the guiding star. This requires an astute understanding of his people and the political climate. The focus on political necessity over abstract morality fundamentally reshaped Western political thought. Prior to Machiavelli, much political philosophy was intertwined with theology and ethics, seeking to define the good ruler in moral terms. Machiavelli ripped this framework apart, arguing that a ruler primarily needs to be effective. He observed that rulers who always tried to be good in the conventional sense often failed, bringing ruin upon themselves and their states. Instead, he proposed that a ruler must learn how not to be good when circumstances demand it. This doesn't mean always being evil, but possessing the flexibility and willingness to depart from conventional virtues when the survival of the state is at stake. He illustrates this with historical examples, demonstrating that princes who were perceived as ruthless often achieved greater stability and success than those who adhered strictly to moral precepts. The ruler's primary duty is to safeguard the state, and any action, no matter how unsavory, that contributes to this end is permissible, provided it is undertaken with prudence and a clear understanding of its consequences. He offers a utilitarian calculus for statecraft. Actions are judged by their outcome, specifically their contribution to the state's security and power. This pragmatism is not an endorsement of chaos, but rather a blueprint for controlling it. The reason of state, therefore, serves as a crucial ethical shift, divorcing political action from personal morality and anchoring it firmly in the cold, hard ground of practical necessity. It demands that leaders make difficult, often morally compromised decisions for the greater good of the community, recognizing that sometimes the path to order is paved with actions that would be condemned outside the political sphere. This radical departure still forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about leadership and ethics today. Machiavelli's advice regarding military affairs is central to his philosophy and represents another significant break from the conventions of his time. He lived in an era where Italy was a battleground for foreign powers, largely due to the reliance of Italian city-states on mercenary armies. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand the catastrophic failures of these mercenary forces. Their disloyalty, their lack of genuine commitment, their tendency to prolong wars for profit, and their ultimate inability to defend a state effectively. His analysis, particularly in The Prince and the Art of War, vehemently argues that a state's security and independence hinge entirely on its own military strength, specifically a citizen militia. He asserts that a prince ought to have no other object, nor any other thought, nor take anything else as his art, but war and its orders and discipline. This statement underscores the paramount importance of military prowess to any ruler. A prince who neglects military matters, relying instead on treaties, alliances, or hired soldiers, is doomed to fail. The very foundation of political power, Machiavelli believed, is military power. He posits that without good arms, there cannot be good laws. This inversion of the traditional view, which often placed law and justice above military might, highlights his pragmatic and realistic approach. Good governance and the preservation of order are impossible without the coercive power of a strong military to enforce them and deter external threats. The most crucial element of Machiavelli's military philosophy is his insistence on the creation and maintenance of a native citizen army. He ridicules the use of mercenaries and auxiliaries, troops borrowed from allies, describing them as useless and dangerous. Mercenaries, he argues, are faithless, cowardly, and ambitious. They have no genuine attachment to the prince or the state, and will desert or betray their employer when a better offer arises or when danger looms. Auxiliary forces, though potentially loyal to their own ruler, still pose a threat to the state they are defending, as they ultimately serve another master and can easily turn into an occupation force. History, for Machiavelli, provided ample proof of these dangers, and his own experiences in Florence's diplomatic and military councils reinforced this conviction. Instead, a prince should cultivate his own forces, composed of his own subjects who fight for their homes, their families, and their state. These citizen soldiers, imbued with a sense of patriotism and loyalty, are far more reliable and effective than any hired professional. Training and discipline are also key. Machiavelli advocates for constant military exercises, even in times of peace, to keep soldiers prepared and skilled. The prince himself should be a keen student of warfare, understanding topography, logistics, tactics, and strategy. He should read history to learn from the campaigns of great commanders and hunt regularly to familiarize himself with the terrain and develop physical endurance. These seemingly mundane activities are, for Machiavelli, vital components of a prince's virtue, ensuring he is always ready to confront the unpredictable challenges of fortuna on the battlefield. The historical example of the Roman Republic with its citizen legions deeply influenced Machiavelli's military thinking. He saw in Rome a model of a state that achieved greatness and maintained its liberty precisely because its citizens were also its soldiers, dedicated to the common good and capable of defending themselves. This stands in stark contrast to the fragmented and militarily weak Italian states of his time. Machiavelli's emphasis on a strong national army reflects his broader concern for state sovereignty and self-reliance. A state that cannot defend itself is perpetually vulnerable to foreign interference, conquest, and in the whims of other powers. Thus, military self-sufficiency is not merely a tactical recommendation, but a fundamental prerequisite for political independence and the very survival of the state. His call for a citizen army was a revolutionary idea in an age dominated by professional soldiers, laying the groundwork for later concepts of national armies and citizen soldiers in a way that profoundly impacted subsequent military and political thought. The ability to command one's own forces and wield decisive military power is, for Machiavelli, the ultimate expression of political autonomy and the most reliable guarantee of a prince's authority and the state's security. Machiavelli's understanding of law and institutions, particularly articulated in his discourses on Livy, reveals a republican leaning often obscured by the notoriety of the prince. While the prince advises an autocratic ruler on how to seize and maintain power, the discourses delve into the conditions necessary for a lasting and stable republic. Here, Machiavelli argues that a well-ordered state requires not just strong leadership, but robust institutions and a system of laws that can channel human passions and prevent corruption. He famously asserts that all cities that have enjoyed dominion and power have always had a mixed government, where the nobles, the people, and the prince, or a corresponding magistracy, have their respective share of authority. This preference for a mixed constitution, drawing on classical models like the Roman Republic, demonstrates his belief that a balance of powers is essential to mitigate the inherent conflicts within a society. The tension between the great, the nobles, and the people, the common citizens, is, for Machiavelli, not merely a source of instability, but potentially a wellspring of liberty and strength. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought to eliminate factionalism, Machiavelli viewed it as an inevitable and even productive force. He argued that the tumults of Rome, the constant struggles between the plebeians and the patricians, were, in fact, the very reason for its liberty and greatness. These conflicts, when properly institutionalized and regulated by law, led to the creation of institutions like the tribunes of the plebs, which gave the common people a voice and prevented the unchecked ambition of the powerful. This mechanism ensured that different social classes had a stake in the political system and could air their grievances, thus preventing explosive uprisings. He believed that good laws arise from these very conflicts, forcing competing factions to compromise and establish rules that serve the common good, or at least a broader good than any single faction could achieve on its own. The role of law, therefore, is not merely to impose order from above, but to mediate and contain the natural antagonisms within the body politic. Strong laws are vital to maintain the balance, to ensure justice, and to prevent either the elite or the populace from becoming overly dominant. A republic, in Machiavelli's view, relies on the constant vigilance of its citizens to uphold these laws and resist corruption. He understood that institutions alone are insufficient. They must be animated by civic virtue, the dedication of citizens to the common good, even at personal cost. When this civic virtue declines, laws become mere dead letters and the state succumbs to corruption, which for Machiavelli is the ultimate enemy of a republic. Corruption is not just about financial impropriety. It is the decay of public spirit, the prioritization of private interest over public duty, and the erosion of respect for laws and institutions. He believed that once a state becomes thoroughly corrupt, it is almost impossible to restore its liberty. Therefore, a wise founder of a republic must establish laws and institutions that are designed to combat corruption, to encourage civic participation, and to provide mechanisms for renewal. This includes provisions for accusations and public trials, which allows citizens to hold powerful figures accountable, and even occasional returns to beginnings, periods of intense reform that strip away corrupt practices and restore the original spirit of the laws. While the prince is often seen as a prescription for authoritarian rule, the discourses reveal Machiavelli's profound respect for legal order and constitutionalism as the bedrock of a free and enduring state. He saw republics as more stable and more adaptable in the long run than principalities, precisely because their institutions could harness the collective virtue of a diverse citizenry. His preference for a republican form of government, structured by strong laws and a balance of powers, underscores his belief that while a prince might be necessary to found a state or reform a corrupt one, liberty and longevity are best secured by the broad participation of citizens within a well-ordered legal framework. This complex and nuanced understanding highlights that Machiavelli's philosophy is not a simple advocacy for power at all costs, but a deep exploration of the various forms of political order and the conditions under which they can achieve stability, strength, and ultimately freedom. Machiavelli's profound influence on political thought stems largely from his pioneering approach to political science, effectively divorcing it from theology and traditional morality and treating it as an empirical discipline. Before him, political discourse was often intertwined with discussions of divine will, natural law, or the virtuous ruler defined by ethical ideals. Machiavelli, however, adopted a methodological realism, insisting that politics should be studied as it is and not as it ought to be. He sought to understand the immutable laws governing political behavior, much like a physician studies the human body, diagnosing its ailments and prescribing remedies based on observed symptoms, rather than moralistic pronouncements. This empirical method involved a rigorous study of history, particularly the Roman Republic, as a vast laboratory of political experience. He believed that human nature, Being essentially constant across time meant that past events offered valuable lessons for present challenges. Whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past, he wrote, for all things in the world in every period have their counterparts in ancient times. By analyzing historical examples of successful and failed states, effective and ineffective leaders, Machiavelli sought to extract universal principles of political action. His historical analysis was not merely descriptive, but prescriptive, using the past to illuminate the present and guide future conduct. He was less interested in what rulers should do from a moral standpoint and more in what they must do to achieve their political objectives, namely, acquiring and maintaining power and preserving the state. This led to his emphasis on practical outcomes over idealistic intentions. A ruler's actions for Machiavelli are to be judged not by their inherent morality, but by their consequences for the state. If a morally questionable action leads to stability and security, it is, from a political perspective, a good action. If a morally virtuous action leads to the state's ruin, it is a bad one. This consequentialist view is a hallmark of his realism and a radical departure from traditional ethics. He consistently prioritized political necessity above all else, arguing that a prince cannot observe all those things for which men are considered good, because in order to maintain his state, he is often forced to act in opposition to good faith, to charity, to humanity, to religion. This famous passage is not an exhortation to abandon morality entirely, but a stark recognition of the tragic choices inherent in leadership. The effective ruler must be prepared to get his hands dirty, to choose the lesser of two evils, and to bear the moral burden of actions that are necessary for the greater good of the community. This pragmatic stance is why his work is often considered the foundation of modern political science. He was perhaps the first to systematically analyze power dynamics, statecraft, and governance without the overlay of religious or metaphysical assumptions. He treated the state not as a divine creation or a moral community, but as an organization of power, a human construct whose survival depended on skillful management and a clear-eyed understanding of political realities. His approach paved the way for future political theorists to examine power in a more objective and analytical manner, contributing to the development of political realism as a distinct school of thought. Machiavelli thus invited his readers to look beyond the flattering portraits of ideal rulers and to confront the messy, often brutal mechanics of actual governance. He demonstrated that effective leadership often requires a willingness to perform unpalatable tasks, to make difficult sacrifices, and to accept that political success sometimes demands actions that contradict personal ethics. This unflinching honesty, while shocking to many of his contemporaries and successors, provided an invaluable framework for understanding the perennial challenges of power, leadership, and the preservation of the state. He taught us to assess political phenomena on their own terms, free from the constraints of idealized morality, thus laying the intellectual groundwork for a truly secular and scientific approach to politics. Machiavelli's understanding of ethics and morality is perhaps the most contentious and frequently misunderstood aspect of his philosophy. He did not deny the existence of traditional Christian morality or classical virtues. Rather, he argued that these moral codes, while laudable for individuals, were often counterproductive and even dangerous when applied rigidly to the sphere of statecraft. His innovation was to propose a dual morality, one for the private citizen and another distinct set of criteria for the ruler and the state. In his view, a private individual can afford to be entirely good, generous, and honest, as their actions primarily affect themselves and a limited circle. However, a prince, entrusted with the welfare and survival of an entire state, cannot always adhere to these personal virtues if doing so would jeopardize the community. The good ruler in Machiavelli's political lexicon is not necessarily the morally virtuous ruler, but the effective ruler, one who successfully maintains power, ensures stability, and secures the state. If being good in the conventional sense leads to the ruin of the state, then it is politically bad. Conversely, if an action generally considered bad, like deception or judicious cruelty, leads to the preservation and prosperity of the state, then it is politically good. This is the essence of his famous dictum that a prince must learn how not to be good and to use this ability or not to use it according to necessity. He is not advocating for evil's sake, but for a calculated flexibility, a willingness to depart from traditional virtues when the circumstances of state demand it. For example, he advises that a prince should be parsimonious rather than generous. A generous prince will quickly exhaust his resources, forcing him to tax his subjects heavily, which will make him hated. A parsimonious prince, however, will be able to fund his military and projects without burdening the populace, eventually being perceived as generous when he doesn't take from them. Similarly, regarding truthfulness, Machiavelli observes that princes who have kept their word often fail, while those who have mastered deception have succeeded. He therefore concludes that a prince should not keep his word when to do so would be to his disadvantage, and when the reasons that caused him to make a promise are no longer present. Again, this is not a blanket endorsement of lying, but a recognition that in the volatile world of international relations and domestic intrigue, rigid adherence to pledges can lead to ruin. The prince must be astute enough to know when to keep his word and when to break it, always with the state's security in mind. This detachment of political action from absolute moral strictures was revolutionary. It placed the reason of state above individual conscience and religious commandment, effectively secularizing political ethics. The ruler's conscience in Machiavelli's framework must be primarily dedicated to the well-being of the political body. This pragmatic and utilitarian calculus shocked many, leading to the lasting pejorative association of Machiavellian with cunning, duplicity, and moral unscrupulousness. However, a deeper reading reveals that Machiavelli was not promoting amorality as an ideal, but describing the painful realities of leadership. He recognized that the pursuit of power and the maintenance of a state often involve choices where all options are morally ambiguous, and the least harmful path for the greater good might involve actions that would be condemned in a private citizen. He does not celebrate these actions, but presents them as necessary evils. Moreover, Machiavelli often implies that the effectiveness of these politically expedient actions depends on their judicious and discreet application. A prince who is openly and consistently cruel or deceitful will quickly lose the trust and loyalty of his subjects, leading to his downfall. The art lies in appearing virtuous while being ready to act otherwise, in striking the right balance between fear and hatred, and in employing severity swiftly and decisively when necessary, then quickly returning to clemency. His ethical framework, therefore, is not a license for unbridled villainy, but a somber reflection on the compromises and difficult decisions inherent in the exercise of power, emphasizing that the ultimate moral imperative for a leader is the survival and prosperity of the state, even if it requires stepping into the moral gray areas of political action. The enduring tension between virtù, and fortuna lies at the heart of Machiavelli's understanding of human agency and the limits of political control. As discussed, virtù, a blend of skill, courage, foresight, and adaptability, represents the human capacity to shape events, to act decisively, and to impose order on a chaotic world. Fortuna, on the other hand, embodies the unpredictable forces of chance, luck, and circumstance, the elements beyond human control that can either aid or thwart the most carefully laid plans. Machiavelli famously likens fortuna to a raging river, uncontrollable when in flood, devastating everything in its path. However, he quickly adds that when it is quiet, men can make provisions for it with dikes and dams so that when it rises later, its waters will go off in a canal and its impetus will not be so unbridled and so damaging. This metaphor encapsulates his belief that while fortuna cannot be entirely conquered, it can be managed and mitigated by proactive human effort, by virtù. A truly capable prince anticipates potential misfortunes and prepares for them during times of peace and stability. This means building a strong military, fostering loyal subjects, establishing robust institutions, and accumulating resources. When the inevitable flood of fortuna arrives, the prince with virtù is better positioned to weather the storm and redirect its destructive force. Machiavelli argues that fortuna is more likely to favor the audacious and the bold. He suggests that fortune is a woman, and if you want to hold her down, it is necessary to beat her and accost her. This provocative statement implies that fortuna responds to forceful, decisive action rather than timid hesitation. A prince who is overly cautious, waiting for perfect conditions, will often miss opportunities and be overwhelmed by events. The successful ruler must be willing to take calculated risks, to seize the moment, and to impose his will on circumstances, rather than passively react to them. This doesn't imply recklessness, but rather a readiness to act with impetus, with vigor and speed, when the situation demands it. The interplay between virtù and fortuna also highlights the fragility of human achievements. Even the most virtuous prince, one possessing extraordinary skill and foresight, can still be undone by an overwhelming stroke of bad luck, an unforeseen plague, a sudden shift in alliances, or the death of a key advisor. Machiavelli acknowledges this inherent uncertainty, reminding rulers that complete control is an illusion. Yet he insists that focusing on cultivating virtù is the only sensible response. By maximizing one's capabilities and preparing for eventualities, a ruler increases his chances of success, even if ultimate victory is never guaranteed. This dynamic relationship forces leaders to confront a fundamental paradox. They must strive for mastery over their environment while simultaneously acknowledging the limits of their control. The prudent prince knows when to adapt his methods to the shifting winds of fortuna and when to stubbornly push forward with his own designs. He must possess the flexibility to change his nature, to be cunning as a fox when faced with traps, and fierce as a lion when confronting wolves, according to the demands of the moment. Machiavelli concludes that while fortuna may account for half of human actions, the other half, the realm of human choice and effort, is within our grasp. It is in this arena of virtù that leaders can truly make a difference, demonstrating their capacity for strategic thinking, decisive action, and adaptive leadership. His philosophy, therefore, is not one of fatalism, but a powerful call to agency, urging individuals, particularly those in positions of power, to cultivate their abilities to the fullest extent possible, to confront adversity head-on, and to strive to shape their own destiny and the destiny of their state, even in the face of insurmountable odds. The constant struggle between human will and the unpredictable nature of the world remains a timeless theme, resonating through centuries of political thought and human endeavor. Machiavelli's concept of founding new states and maintaining their longevity is another cornerstone of his philosophy, particularly relevant in The Prince. He held profound admiration for founder figures, individuals like Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus, who, through their exceptional virtù, established new orders, reformed corrupt states, or liberated their people. These founders, he argued, face the most formidable challenges, but also have the greatest opportunities for glory and lasting fame. To found a new state successfully, a prince must possess extraordinary foresight and ruthlessness. He must understand that radical change often necessitates radical measures. The existing order, with its ingrained habits, customs, and beneficiaries, will naturally resist innovation. Therefore, a new prince must be prepared to injure those who benefited from the old system and to win over those who stand to gain from the new. This often involves eliminating rivals, disarming the populace if their loyalty is suspect, and creating a completely new military and legal framework. Machiavelli stresses that all injuries must be inflicted quickly and decisively, all at one stroke, so that the pain is felt only once and then forgotten. Benefits, conversely, should be dispensed gradually, little by little, so they are savored and remembered for longer. This strategic use of cruelty and benevolence is crucial for consolidating power and minimizing resentment. The greatest difficulty for a new prince, Machiavelli warns, lies in introducing new institutions and methods. He states that there is nothing more difficult to handle, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than to put oneself at the head of introducing new orders. This is because those who profited from the old order will vehemently oppose the change, while those who might benefit from the new are only lukewarm supporters, often out of fear of the old regime or a general skepticism about innovation. Thus, the innovator stands almost alone, making it imperative for him to possess the power to enforce his will. A prophet, a founder or reformer who relies only on persuasion without the capacity to compel, will fail. He must have his own arms to force adherence to his new laws and structures. This directly ties back to Machiavelli's insistence on a strong, loyal military as the bedrock of any state. Beyond the initial founding, the longevity of a state, whether a principality or a republic, depends on its ability to adapt and to resist the forces of decay, which Machiavelli identifies primarily as corruption. In the discourses, he extols the Roman Republic as a model of longevity, attributing its success to its mixed constitution, its capacity for self-correction through institutions like censorship and public accusations, and its ability to channel internal conflicts into productive outcomes. He believed that constant vigilance and occasional returns to the beginnings, periods of intense reform to purge corrupt practices and restore the original spirit of the laws, were essential for a republic to endure. For both principalities and republics, the cultivation of civic virtue among the populace is vital. This means fostering patriotism, respect for laws, and a willingness to prioritize the common good over private interests. While a prince can impose order through fear, a republic relies on the active participation and dedication of its citizens. A state that loses its civic virtue inevitably succumbs to corruption, internal strife, and external conquest. Ultimately, Machiavelli underscores that the greatest challenge for any ruler or state is not just to acquire power, but to maintain it against internal and external threats, and to ensure its endurance across generations. This requires a dynamic balance of ruthless pragmatism in the short term, coupled with the wisdom to build lasting institutions and cultivate a public spirit that can withstand the inevitable assaults of fortuna and the corrosive effects of human imperfection. The founders who successfully navigate these treacherous waters achieve a unique and revered place in history, for they are the ones who truly shape human societies. Machiavelli's concept of human nature, as previously touched upon, is not merely a passing observation, but a deeply ingrained premise that underpins every facet of his political theory. His view of humanity is decidedly pessimistic, asserting that individuals are fundamentally self-interested, fickle, and prone to vice. He doesn't seek to condemn humanity morally, but rather to describe its operational reality in the political sphere. This realism contrasts sharply with the more optimistic anthropological views prevalent in classical and Christian thought, which often posited an inherent human capacity for reason and goodness that, if nurtured, could lead to a harmonious society. Machiavelli, however, sees ambition, fear, and avarice as the primary motivators of human action. Men are driven by a desire for gain, whether it be material wealth, honor, or power, and they will resort to deceit and betrayal when it serves their interests. They are quick to forget kindnesses, but slow to forgive injuries. This belief is not an arbitrary judgment, but a conclusion drawn from his extensive reading of history and his own observations of political behavior in Florence and beyond. He believed that expecting people to act virtuously in politics is a recipe for disaster for the ruler who harbors such illusions. A prince who assumes his subjects are inherently good and trustworthy will inevitably be taken advantage of and ultimately ruined. Therefore, the prudent ruler must always assume the worst about human behavior and govern accordingly. This involves adopting policies and strategies that account for human weaknesses and vices rather than relying on their virtues. This leads to his famous advice that a prince should be wary of relying on love, as men have less hesitation in offending one who is beloved than one who is feared. For love is held by a chain of obligation which, because of men's baseness, is broken at every opportunity for their own utility. But fear is held by a dread of punishment that never abandons you. This statement encapsulates his core understanding. Self-interest is a more potent and reliable motivator than affection or loyalty, especially in times of crisis. However, Machiavelli's pessimism about human nature is not absolute or without nuance. While individuals are generally self-interested, he also recognizes the potential for collective civic virtue within a republic, where citizens can be trained to prioritize the common good. This collective virtue is not an inherent trait, but is cultivated through strong laws, good institutions, and exemplary leadership. In a well-ordered republic, the laws are designed to channel private ambitions toward public benefit, or at least to check their destructive potential. Yet even in a republic, the fundamental baseness of human nature remains a constant threat, capable of eroding civic spirit and leading to corruption. The wise legislator, therefore, constructs institutions with this inherent human flaw in mind, creating checks and balances that prevent any single individual or faction from accumulating too much power and succumbing to their selfish desires. For Machiavelli, even apparent acts of public spiritedness can often be traced back to self-interest or the avoidance of punishment. People are less likely to rebel if they fear the consequences, and more likely to contribute to the state if they see a clear benefit or if their immediate interests are aligned with public policy. This cold, hard view of human motivation is what allows Machiavelli to develop a science of politics, one based on observable cause and effect, rather than on theological or moral assumptions. He stripped away the veneer of idealized humanity to reveal the raw impulses that truly drive political action. His anthropology thus becomes a foundational tool for statecraft. By understanding human nature as it is, a ruler can predict reactions, manipulate incentives, and create a stable order even among individuals who are otherwise prone to chaos and self-destruction. This unflinching realism about human imperfection is precisely what makes his work so enduringly insightful and, for many, profoundly unsettling. Machiavelli's concept of glory and reputation, while often seen as secondary to the acquisition and maintenance of power, is intricately linked to a ruler's ability to govern effectively and secure the state's longevity. For Machiavelli, true glory is not merely popular acclaim or superficial fame. It is the lasting recognition achieved by those who demonstrate exceptional virtue in founding new states, leading their people to greatness, or defending their liberty against overwhelming odds. This kind of glory is earned through decisive action, strategic foresight, and a willingness to make difficult choices for the common good. He admired historical figures like the Roman emperors who, by their deeds, left an indelible mark on history and secured the prosperity of their states. Conversely, princes who inherit power and fail to demonstrate virtue are destined for obscurity or infamy. The pursuit of glory, for Machiavelli, serves a practical political purpose. A ruler with a strong, positive reputation commands greater respect, instills more confidence in his subjects and allies, and deters potential enemies. This reputation, however, must be carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. It is not enough for a prince to simply be virtuous. He must also appear virtuous, even if his actual actions sometimes diverge from conventional morality. Machiavelli advises that a prince should appear to be compassionate, trustworthy, humane, honest, and religious, and indeed he should be so. But he should have his mind so disposed that if he needs to be otherwise, he is able and knows how to change to the contrary. This famous passage highlights the crucial distinction between appearance and reality in politics. The perception of a ruler's qualities can be as, or even more powerful than the qualities themselves. A prince who is widely perceived as strong, wise, and decisive can leverage this reputation to achieve his aims without always resorting to force. This requires a shrewd understanding of public opinion and the art of propaganda. A ruler must carefully manage his image, avoiding actions that would make him hated or despised, even if those actions might be tactically beneficial in the short term. For instance, he advises against confiscating subjects' property or dishonoring their women, as these actions breed deep-seated hatred that no amount of fear can overcome. Such acts, though they might appear to benefit the prince temporarily, ultimately erode his reputation and pave the way for his downfall. The reputation of being cruel, but justified, for instance, can be politically effective if it leads to order and security. But a reputation for arbitrary cruelty is disastrous. Moreover, a prince's reputation is also built through visible achievements, successful military campaigns, the establishment of stable laws, the promotion of prosperity, and the avoidance of famine or prolonged conflict. These are tangible signs of a ruler's virtue that inspire loyalty and strengthen his position. By contrast, a ruler perceived as weak, indecisive, or constantly struggling with internal dissent will lose the respect of both his subjects and his external rivals. Machiavelli also underscores the importance of a ruler avoiding neutrality in conflicts between neighboring states. Taking a decisive side, even if risky, enhances a prince's reputation for strength and commitment, whereas neutrality often leads to being despised by both sides. and eventually being conquered by the victor. Ultimately, for Machiavelli, glory is not an end in itself, but a powerful tool in the arsenal of statecraft. It is a form of political capital that enhances a ruler's authority, contributes to the stability of the state, and ensures his legacy. The pursuit of glory, properly understood and managed with virtu, becomes a means to the higher end of securing the state's survival and prosperity, marking the prince as a truly effective and memorable leader. It is the lasting verdict of history on a ruler's capacity to master fortuna and achieve lasting political order. Machiavelli's advice on how a prince should acquire and maintain loyalty is profoundly pragmatic, stemming directly from his pessimistic view of human nature. He understood that true, unwavering loyalty is rare and that most human allegiances are conditional, based on self-interest or fear. Therefore, a prince cannot rely on the spontaneous affection of his subjects, but must actively cultivate their obedience and support through a strategic combination of incentives and deterrence. As established, Machiavelli famously argued that it is much safer to be feared than loved if one has to choose between the two. His reasoning is that love is a fragile bond, easily broken when it conflicts with an individual's self-interest or when danger looms. Fear, however, is maintained by the dread of punishment, which is a more constant and reliable motivator for adherence to the prince's will. This does not mean a prince should seek to be hated. On the contrary, Machiavelli explicitly warns against inspiring hatred, as it leads to conspiracy and rebellion. Hatred arises from arbitrary cruelty, especially the confiscation of property or the dishonoring of women, which are perceived as direct attacks on individuals' fundamental security and dignity. A prince, therefore, must be feared for his power and decisiveness, but never hated for his injustice or avarice. The ideal, if attainable, is to be both loved and feared, but if a choice must be made, fear is the more secure foundation for authority. Beyond fear, a prince can cultivate loyalty through strategic acts of generosity and careful management of public perception. While he advises against excessive generosity that depletes resources, he also suggests that a prince should be seen as a benefactor. For example, he can delegate unpopular tasks or punishments to others while reserving acts of clemency and reward for himself. This makes him appear merciful and just, while shifting the blame for necessary harshness onto his subordinates. This is a subtle but effective way of manipulating public sentiment. Another crucial element in securing loyalty is consistency and predictability in governance. While a prince must be adaptable in his actions, his fundamental character and commitment to the state's security should remain constant. Subjects who understand what to expect from their ruler, even if he is severe, are more likely to comply than those governed by an unpredictable tyrant. This creates a sense of order and justice, however harsh, which fosters a form of consent, or at least passive acceptance. Furthermore, Machiavelli highlights the importance of keeping the populace occupied and united. Providing opportunities for subjects to demonstrate their skills, celebrate festivals, and engage in public works can divert their attention from potential grievances and foster a sense of shared identity and purpose. A wise prince will also engage in a major undertaking from time to time, such as a military campaign or a grand public project, to keep his subjects energized and focused on external achievements rather than internal dissent. This strategy helps to consolidate popular support and generate a common enthusiasm. Lastly, loyalty is also nurtured through a prince's display of strength and virtue in military matters. A prince who can effectively defend his state against external threats, maintain internal order, and lead his armies to victory inspires respect and confidence among his subjects. They are more likely to be loyal to a ruler who demonstrates competence and the ability to a combination of necessary fear, perceived justice, strategic benefits, and a demonstrable capacity for effective governance. A prince who masters these arts will find his subjects, however self-interested, bound to him by the most reliable chains of political necessity. Protect them, rather than one who appears weak or indecisive. In sum, Machiavelli's approach to loyalty is coldly analytical. It is not about earning genuine affection from a moral perspective, but about establishing a robust political bond based on a character count for Part 12, 591. Machiavelli's unique understanding of religion and its role in the state is another crucial element that sets him apart from many of his contemporaries and later commentators. While living in a deeply religious era and never openly denying the existence of God or the tenets of Christianity, Machiavelli treated religion primarily as a political tool, a powerful instrument for social cohesion and control, rather than a matter of divine truth. He observed that rulers who skillfully utilized religious beliefs often found it easier to unite their people, command obedience, and inspire courage. In the discourses, he extensively praises the ancient Romans for their reverence for their pagan gods, arguing that this religiosity was a major source of their civic virtue and military success. The Roman generals, before battle, consulted auguries and offered sacrifices, instilling confidence in their soldiers, who believed their cause was favored by the divine. Oaths sworn on the gods were taken seriously, acting as a powerful deterrent against betrayal. This, for Machiavelli, was not about the truth of the deities, but about the utility of the belief system in fostering discipline, loyalty, and a shared moral code that strengthened the state. He famously asserts that as the observance of divine worship is the cause of greatness for republics, so contempt for it is the cause of their ruin. This is a purely pragmatic statement, not a theological one. He is interested in the effects of religion on society and governance, not its spiritual validity. From this perspective, a wise prince or a wise founder of a republic should cultivate and uphold religious practices, even if he privately harbors doubts about their truth. The prince must appear religious, for men are generally judged more by their eyes than by their hands, because everyone is capable of seeing, but few are capable of feeling. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few feel what you are. A reputation for piety, even if feigned, adds to a ruler's authority and credibility, making him seem more trustworthy and benevolent in the eyes of his subjects. This calculated use of religion stands in stark contrast to the medieval ideal of a ruler as a pious agent of God, whose legitimacy derived directly from divine sanction. Machiavelli flips this. A ruler gains legitimacy by effectively managing the political utility of religion. However, Machiavelli also subtly critiques the negative political impact of Christianity as practiced in his time. He argued that the Christian emphasis on humility, meekness, and turning the other cheek made men less warlike, less aggressive, and ultimately less capable of defending their states and liberties. He lamented that Christianity taught men to endure injuries rather than avenge them, leading to a weakening of civic spirit and military virtue. He contrasted this with the robust earthly religiosity of the Romans, which fostered a martial spirit and a deep commitment to the state. Furthermore, Machiavelli condemned the temporal power of the papacy, which in his view was too weak to unite Italy under its own rule, yet strong enough to prevent any other power from doing so. This fragmentation, fueled by papal politics, contributed significantly to Italy's vulnerability to foreign invasion and its overall instability. His critique of the papacy was not primarily theological, but geopolitical. The Church, by its political actions, was a major impediment to Italian unity and strength. In essence, Machiavelli stripped religion of its transcendental meaning within the political sphere and redefined it as a powerful instrument of statecraft. A prudent ruler understands that religion can be a potent force for order, obedience, and national identity, and therefore must be carefully managed and harnessed to serve the interests of the state. He advises princes to uphold the appearances of religion, for its moralizing influence and promise of divine sanction or punishment could be invaluable in ensuring the docility and cooperation of the populace. His perspective revolutionized the way political thinkers would approach the relationship between church and state, moving towards a more secular instrumental view of religious influence in the public domain. Machiavelli's thoughts on war and diplomacy are intrinsically linked to his concept of military strength and the pragmatic pursuit of state interests. For him, war is an inevitable and often necessary aspect of interstate relations, and a ruler must always be prepared for it. He dismisses the idealistic notion that peace can be maintained purely through goodwill or alliances, asserting that the desire for dominion and the fear of being dominated are constant drivers of conflict. Therefore, the art of war is not merely a specialized skill, but the very foundation of statecraft. As he famously states in The Prince, a ruler ought to have no other object, nor any other thought, nor take anything else as his art, but war and its orders and discipline. This highlights his conviction that military preparedness is the ultimate guarantor of a state's sovereignty and survival. A state that is militarily weak invites aggression and cannot effectively pursue its diplomatic objectives. Diplomacy, in Machiavelli's view, is not an alternative to war, but rather its continuation by other means. Negotiations, treaties, and alliances are all tools to be employed strategically, either to avoid an unfavorable war, to secure advantages, or to prepare for an inevitable conflict. He stresses that all agreements are conditional and subject to change based on shifts in power and interest. A prince should not feel bound by a treaty if adhering to it would be to his disadvantage, especially when the original reasons for making the promise are no longer present. This pragmatic approach to alliances and treaties often involves an element of dissimulation, where a prince must appear trustworthy while always being ready to break his word if state interests demand it. The goal of diplomacy is always to advance the state's power and security. Machiavelli advises against neutrality in conflicts between powerful neighbors. He argues that taking a side, even if risky, is always preferable to remaining neutral, for a neutral state will inevitably be despised by both victors and vanquished. If the prince allies with a victor, he earns their gratitude and possibly a share of the spoils. If his chosen side loses, he might still gain respect for his commitment and perhaps find new allies. But a neutral state, having pleased no one, will be left isolated and vulnerable to the desires of the stronger powers. This demonstrates his clear understanding of realpolitik. In a world of competing powers, inaction or indecision is often the most dangerous course. Moreover, Machiavelli emphasizes the importance of understanding the political landscape, the strengths and weaknesses of other states, and the motivations of their rulers. This intelligence is crucial for effective diplomacy and strategic military planning. A prince must be a keen observer, analyzing geopolitical dynamics and anticipating potential threats and opportunities. He must learn from history, studying the campaigns of great generals and the diplomatic maneuvers of successful states to develop his own strategic acumen. The core principle guiding both war and diplomacy is the reason of state. Every action, whether on the battlefield or at the negotiating table, must be judged by its effectiveness in preserving and enhancing the state's power and security. This means a willingness to engage in conflict when necessary, to be ruthless when required, and to be cunning in negotiations, all with the ultimate goal of safeguarding the political body. For Machiavelli, even peace is a condition to be actively managed and secured through strength, not passively received. His insights into these fields laid the groundwork for modern strategic thought, emphasizing the interplay of power, interest, and the calculated use of force in international relations. He taught that weakness invites aggression, and that only through a combination of military preparedness and astute diplomacy can a state hope to navigate the treacherous waters of global politics and ensure its survival. Machiavelli's distinction between a prince and a republic is fundamental to understanding the breadth and nuance of his political philosophy. While the prince focuses on the acquisition and maintenance of power by a single ruler, Discourses on Livy explores the conditions for a stable, free, and enduring republic. These two works are not contradictory but complementary, representing different approaches to statecraft suitable for different circumstances and political objectives. A prince, for Machiavelli, is the ideal leader for founding a new state, reforming a corrupt one, or acting decisively in times of extreme crisis. The prince's strength lies in his singular will, his capacity for quick, centralized decision-making, and his ability to implement radical changes without the delays or internal conflicts inherent in a republican system. In a moment of profound instability or when faced with external threats, a prince with exceptional virtue can cut through bureaucratic inertia, eliminate opposition, and impose a new order necessary for the state's survival. He can apply well-used cruelty swiftly and decisively to consolidate power, then temper it with clemency, establishing a strong, singular authority. His decisions are unhindered by the need for consensus or widespread popular approval, allowing for speed and ruthlessness when required. However, Machiavelli also recognized the inherent limitations and dangers of princely rule. A principality's stability is often dependent on the virtue of a single individual. If that prince dies or is weak, the entire structure can collapse. Moreover, a principality, lacking the broad participation and checks and balances of a republic, is more prone to tyranny and corruption over time. The prince might prioritize his personal glory over the state's welfare, or his successors might lack his founding virtue. A republic, on the other hand, is presented as the superior form of government for long-term stability, growth, and the preservation of liberty once it is established and well-ordered. Machiavelli argued that republics are generally stronger and more adaptable than principalities because they can draw on the collective virtue of their citizens. By institutionalizing conflict through a mixed constitution that balances the power of the nobles and the people and providing avenues for participation, a republic can channel the diverse energies and ambitions of its populace into productive channels. The Roman Republic, with its citizen armies and its capacity for self-correction through law, was his prime example of an enduring and glorious state. He believed that the people, when properly governed by laws, are generally more prudent and constant than a single prince. While a prince might be quicker to act, a republic, through its deliberative processes, can often make wiser decisions in the long run. Republics are also better equipped to foster civic virtue, the dedication of citizens to the common good, because citizens have a direct stake in their government and are motivated to defend their shared liberty. In a principality, subjects are often passive and self-interested, whereas in a republic, active participation and military service are expected. This leads to a more robust and resilient state. The ideal for Machiavelli is not a permanent prince, but a strong ruler who, through his virtue, can create or reform a state and then establish institutions that allow it to evolve into a republic. The prince's role is often transitional, a necessary evil or a temporary solution to a dire problem, with the ultimate goal being the establishment of a free and self-governing community. This complex relationship reveals that Machiavelli was not simply an advocate for absolute power, but a nuanced observer of political forms. He understood that the best form of government depends on the specific circumstances, the character of the people, and the immediate challenges faced by the state. While a prince might be essential for moments of founding or crisis, a well-ordered republic offers the most promising path to lasting liberty, strength, and glory for a people. His dual focus thus provides a comprehensive, albeit often unsettling, guide to political action in all its varied forms. Machiavelli's concept of political leadership is a radical departure from the idealized notions of virtuous kings and philosopher rulers that preceded him. He stripped away the moralizing rhetoric to present a brutally pragmatic, almost clinical dissection of what it takes to be an effective leader in a world driven by power and self-interest. For Machiavelli, effective political leadership is not about personal goodness or adherence to abstract ethical principles. It is about results, specifically the acquisition, maintenance, and expansion of state power and security. The ideal leader, whether a prince or a republican magistrate, must possess virtue, which, as previously noted, is far removed from conventional morality. It encompasses a unique blend of qualities: courage, decisiveness, foresight, adaptability, shrewdness, and the capacity for ruthless action when necessary. A leader with virtue is able to discern the true nature of political reality, recognize opportunities, anticipate threats, and act swiftly and effectively to impose his will on events. He must be a master strategist, both militarily and politically, understanding human motivations and the levers of power. A crucial aspect of Machiavellian leadership is the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, to be flexible in method while remaining constant in purpose, the preservation of the state. He famously describes the ideal prince as needing to be both a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. This means a leader must be capable of cunning and deception when necessary, as well as courage and overwhelming force. The truly great leader knows when to employ each quality, not out of malice, but out of political necessity. This adaptability is critical because fortune or chance plays a significant role in human affairs. A leader cannot control all events, but he can prepare for them, mitigate their impact, and seize the opportunities they present. The leader who possesses virtue is able to navigate the unpredictable currents of fortuna, making the most of favorable winds and bracing for storms. Furthermore, Machiavelli stresses the importance of appearances in leadership. A prince must appear to possess certain virtues: piety, integrity, compassion, even if he is prepared to act contrary to them when the demands of the state dictate. This is because the majority of people judge by what they see, and a positive public image contributes significantly to a leader's authority and legitimacy. The art of dissimulation becomes a vital tool in maintaining public support and deterring opposition. A leader must also be willing to make difficult and often unpopular decisions. Unlike private citizens who can afford the luxury of adhering to personal ethics, a ruler is burdened with the responsibility for the entire state. This often means choosing the lesser of two evils, sacrificing individual morality for the greater good of the community. Machiavelli does not celebrate these choices, but presents them as the harsh realities of power. The leader must be prepared to incur the moral stain of such actions if they are necessary for the state's survival. Finally, effective leadership demands a profound understanding of human nature, its inherent self-interest, its fickleness, and its susceptibility to fear and ambition. By understanding these fundamental drives, a leader can predict reactions, manipulate incentives, and create a system of governance that channels human passions towards stable order rather than chaos. Machiavelli's portrayal of political leadership is thus a stark and demanding one. It calls for an individual of extraordinary intellect, will, and ruthlessness, capable of rising above conventional morality to ensure the survival and prosperity of the state. He offers a mirror to leaders, showing them not what they should be in an ideal world, but what they must be to succeed in the messy, often dangerous reality of politics. This unflinching realism has made his work both controversial and enduringly influential, shaping how we think about the very essence of leadership and power. The concept of political pathology and the methods to prevent state decay are central concerns for Machiavelli, particularly explored in discourses on Livy. He viewed states, whether principalities or republics, as organic entities susceptible to decay, much like a human body. The primary disease that threatened the life of a state was corruption. For Machiavelli, corruption was not merely financial impropriety, but a deeper societal malady, the erosion of civic virtue, the prioritization of private interest over public good, the weakening of laws, and the decay of institutions. When citizens and rulers cease to dedicate themselves to the common welfare and instead pursue personal gain or factional interests, the state begins to rot from within. Machiavelli believed that once corruption takes deep root, it is exceedingly difficult, almost impossible, to cure. A corrupt populace cannot sustain a free republic because they lack the civic spirit and discipline necessary for self-governance. Their focus shifts from collective security and liberty to individual enrichment and partisan squabbles, making them vulnerable to both internal tyranny and external conquest. To prevent this decay, Machiavelli advocated for several preventative and curative measures. Firstly, he stressed the importance of good laws and strong institutions. Laws are essential for channeling human passions, mediating conflicts between social classes like the nobles and the people, and ensuring that justice is administered. Institutions such as tribunals and councils provide mechanisms for accountability and deliberation, preventing any single individual or faction from gaining unchecked power. He praised Rome for its institutions like the tribunes of the plebs, which allowed the common people to voice grievances and check the power of the patricians, thereby releasing tensions in a controlled manner rather than through violent uprising. Secondly, Machiavelli championed the idea of returns to beginnings, ritorno ai principi. He observed that states, over time, inevitably drift away from their founding principles. To combat corruption and renew civic virtue, occasional periods of intense reform are necessary. These returns involve re-examining the original laws and customs of the state, punishing corrupt officials, and inspiring a renewed sense of public purpose among the citizenry. Such reforms, though potentially painful, are crucial for purging the accumulated decay and restoring the vigor of the state. He suggests that these returns can be brought about either by external shock, a war, or a crisis, that forces self-reflection, or by the actions of virtuous men within the state. Thirdly, the cultivation of civic virtue among the populace is paramount. This is not an inherent trait, but is fostered through education, military training, a citizen militia, and the example of good leaders. A state where citizens are willing to prioritize the common good, uphold laws, and defend their liberty is far more resilient to corruption. Machiavelli emphasizes that a state must encourage public accusations against powerful figures who abuse their authority, as this acts as a vital check on corruption and allows public discontent to be channeled through legal means rather than boiling over into rebellion. A state that fears to prosecute powerful individuals is already on the path to decay. Lastly, a strong military composed of native citizens is a key defense against both external threats and internal weakness. A citizen army fighting for its homeland fosters discipline, patriotism, and a shared commitment to the state, thereby strengthening its collective virtue against the forces of decay. Machiavelli's analysis of political pathology thus presents a cyclical view of history. States rise, flourish, decay into corruption, and eventually fall, only to be replaced by new ones. However, he also offers hope that through proactive measures, wise governance, and the cultivation of civic virtue, the inevitable decline can be delayed and the life of a state can be extended, ensuring its freedom and greatness for generations. His profound concern for these diseases of the body politic underscores his commitment to the lasting health and stability of political communities, whether led by a prince or governed by a republic. Machiavelli's theory of political cycles and the historical recurrence of events profoundly shaped his understanding of governance and state longevity. Unlike linear historical perspectives, which might view progress as inevitable, Machiavelli embraced a cyclical view heavily influenced by classical historians like Polybius. He believed that all states, regardless of their initial form, monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, are prone to decay and eventually transform into their corrupt counterparts, tyranny, oligarchy, or anarchy, only to cycle back again. This idea is explicitly articulated in the Discourses, where he outlines the anacyclosis, or natural cycle of governments. A monarchy, initially good and just, tends to degenerate into a tyranny as rulers become hereditary and lose their virtue. The people, tired of tyranny, rise up and establish an aristocracy, which then decays into an oligarchy as a small elite becomes self-serving. This, in turn, leads to the rise of popular government democracy, which then descends into anarchy, licentiousness, as the populace becomes ungovernable and factions proliferate. From anarchy, a strong leader emerges, forming a new monarchy, and the cycle begins anew. This cyclical view does not imply fatalism, however. Instead, Machiavelli argued that wise state founders and leaders can learn from history to break or at least prolong these cycles of decay. The key, he believed, lies in adopting a mixed constitution, which combines elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. The Roman Republic, his ultimate model, achieved remarkable longevity precisely because it incorporated elements of all three. The consuls represented monarchy, the Senate aristocracy, and the tribunes of the plebs democracy. By balancing these different social forces and allowing their inherent conflicts to check one another, Rome created a stable and resilient system that resisted the natural tendency towards corruption and collapse. This mixed government was not static, but dynamic, constantly adapting and evolving through internal tumults, the conflicts between the nobles and the people, which, when properly channeled through law, led to beneficial innovations and stronger institutions. Machiavelli's emphasis on historical recurrence also served as a methodological tool. He believed that human nature remains constant across time, meaning that the fundamental drives of ambition, fear, and self-interest are always at play. Therefore, by studying the past, one can understand the present and anticipate the future. Whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past, he wrote, for all things in the world in every period have their counterparts in ancient times. This allows a ruler to learn from the successes and failures of predecessors, applying timeless principles of statecraft to contemporary challenges. He constantly drew parallels between ancient Rome and the Italian city-states of his own era, using history not as a mere chronicle, but as a practical guide for action. The lesson from history, for Machiavelli, is that fortuna can be mitigated by virtue, but never fully conquered. Even the best designed states and the most virtuous leaders will eventually face challenges that test their resilience. Therefore, a state must always be prepared for change, vigilant against corruption, and ready to adapt its institutions and practices. The cycle can be slowed, but perhaps never entirely stopped. This cyclical understanding of political history leads to a profound sense of political realism. It suggests that utopias are impossible and that the pursuit of perfect political order is futile. Instead, leaders must focus on practical solutions that address the inherent flaws of human nature and the cyclical nature of political systems. They must strive to create a state that is robust enough to withstand the inevitable shocks of fortuna and the corrosive effects of corruption, ensuring its survival for as long as possible. Machiavelli's historical lens provides a sobering but ultimately empowering message. While the forces of decay are constant, human agency, through the application of virtue and wise institutional design, can significantly influence the trajectory and longevity of political communities. His cyclical view of history remains a powerful analytical framework for understanding the rise and fall of nations. Machiavelli's legacy and his lasting impact on Western political thought are immense and complex, spanning centuries and sparking continuous debate. He is widely considered the father of modern political science, having been the first to systematically analyze politics empirically, divorcing it from theology, ethics, and metaphysics. His unflinching realism fundamentally altered how power, leadership, and the state were understood, shifting the focus from idealized conceptions to practical realities. The immediate impact of The Prince was controversial. It was placed on the index of prohibited books by the Catholic Church and widely condemned by many for its seemingly immoral advice, leading to the pejorative term Machiavellian to describe cunning, deceitful, and unscrupulous behavior in politics. However, despite the public condemnation, his ideas were secretly studied and implemented by rulers and statesmen across Europe, including figures like Henry VIII, Catherine de' Medici, and Cardinal Richelieu, who recognized the practical utility of his counsel. His emphasis on the reason of state, the idea that the survival and well-being of the political community supersede individual moral considerations, became a cornerstone of modern statecraft and international relations. This concept provided a justification for actions that, while ethically questionable in a private context, were deemed necessary for national security and stability. It paved the way for the development of realpolitik, a foreign policy doctrine that prioritizes national interest and power over ideology or ethics. Machiavelli's analysis of human nature, though pessimistic, has remained influential. His assertion that men are generally self-interested and fickle forced subsequent thinkers to confront the darker aspects of human motivation and design political systems that account for these flaws, rather than relying on an idealized view of humanity. This contributed to the development of constitutionalism, with its emphasis on checks and balances, as a way to mitigate the potential for abuse of power by inherently imperfect individuals. Furthermore, his military theories, particularly the insistence on a national citizen army rather than mercenaries, laid the intellectual groundwork for the professional, state-controlled militaries that emerged in later centuries. His understanding of the importance of military strength as the foundation of political power continues to resonate in strategic thought. His distinction between princely rule for founding or reforming states and republican governance for long-term stability and liberty demonstrated a nuanced understanding of different political forms and their suitability for varying circumstances. While The Prince is his most famous work, the Discourses on Livy reveals his profound commitment to republican ideals, the rule of law, and civic virtue as the best guarantors of a free and enduring state. This dual focus shows that he was not simply advocating for tyranny, but exploring the full spectrum of effective statecraft. In the Enlightenment, thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau recognized a different Machiavelli, arguing that The Prince was not a manual for tyrants, but a subtle critique, a warning to the people about the true nature of princely power. This interpretation continues to be debated, underscoring the enduring complexity of his work. Today, Machiavelli remains a touchstone for discussions on leadership, power, ethics, and the realities of governance. His questions about the relationship between means and ends, the tension between morality and political necessity, and the role of force in maintaining order are as relevant as ever. He compels us to look beyond superficial appearances and confront the uncomfortable truths about politics, making his work a timeless, albeit challenging, guide for anyone seeking to understand the enduring dynamics of power and the state. His willingness to strip away illusions and reveal the stark mechanics of political life ensures his permanent place in the pantheon of Western political thought. The contemporary relevance of Niccolo Machiavelli's philosophy is striking, proving that his observations on power, human nature, and statecraft transcend the specific historical context of Renaissance Italy. In an era marked by geopolitical instability, economic competition, and the constant struggle for influence, Machiavelli's insights continue to offer a stark, unromanticized lens through which to view modern politics, leadership, and international relations. His emphasis on political realism, for instance, remains a dominant paradigm in international relations theory. States today, as in Machiavelli's time, often prioritize their national interests and security above all else, engaging in strategic alliances, economic competition, and, when necessary, military intervention, all guided by a clear-eyed assessment of power dynamics. The concept of reason of state or national interest continues to justify actions that might otherwise be deemed morally problematic, from intelligence gathering to drone warfare. Leaders today grapple with the same ethical dilemmas Machiavelli described. When is it necessary to compromise personal morality for the greater good of the nation? His recognition of the need for adaptability and virtue in leadership is equally pertinent. Modern leaders, whether in government, business, or other organizations, must navigate rapidly changing environments, technological disruption, and unforeseen crises, modern fortuna. The ability to be flexible, decisive, and innovative, to anticipate challenges and seize opportunities, and to command loyalty and respect aligns directly with Machiavelli's definition of virtue. Leaders who rigidly adhere to outdated strategies or fail to adapt to new realities often find themselves and their organizations in decline. Machiavelli's pessimistic view of human nature, though often uncomfortable, provides a practical framework for institutional design. His warning that men are generally self-interested and prone to corruption underpins the ongoing necessity for robust checks and balances, transparency, and accountability mechanisms in democratic governance. The very structure of modern liberal democracies, with their separation of powers and protection of individual rights, can be seen as an attempt to mitigate the darker impulses of human ambition and self-interest that Machiavelli so acutely identified. His understanding of the importance of public perception and reputation is also highly relevant in the age of constant media scrutiny and social media. Political leaders invest heavily in managing their image, understanding that public opinion, however fickle, can make or break their authority. The line between appearing virtuous and actually being virtuous, and the strategic deployment of both, remains a key aspect of political communication and leadership in the public eye. Furthermore, his insights into military affairs, the need for a strong, reliable defense force, and the dangers of relying on external powers, continue to inform national security policies worldwide. While the nature of warfare has evolved, the fundamental principle that a state must be capable of defending itself remains constant. Even his sometimes controversial advice regarding the calculated use of fear and occasional cruelty finds echoes in contemporary debates about maintaining law and order, counterterrorism strategies, and the delicate balance between security and civil liberties. While few modern leaders would openly endorse all of Machiavelli's more ruthless prescriptions, his work forces us to confront the uncomfortable yet undeniable realities of power. He reminds us that politics is often a messy, immoral struggle, not an idealistic pursuit of pure virtue. By stripping away illusions, Machiavelli offers a timeless and practical guide for understanding why states rise and fall, why leaders succeed and fail, and how political order can be maintained in a world populated by imperfect individuals driven by enduring human passions. His enduring challenge is to bridge the gap between how we wish politics would be and how it often is, offering a mirror that, though sometimes unflattering, reflects the enduring truths about the human condition and the exercise of power. His legacy is not just historical, but a living, breathing commentary on the eternal dynamics of governance. If you're still listening, you can subscribe for more such videos. Thanks for watching.